Welcome to 7 Steps to Innovate Your Business Model. This is a presentation developed by Norman Shawn and Jeff MacDonald. I guess the first question that we always need to start with is why should you bother innovating your business model? Well, there seem to be three primary drivers for doing so. The first one is that the research points to the fact that innovating your business model seems to have an enormous impact on operating margins, and recent global IBM study, as well as a study by the Economist Intelligence Unit, suggest that businesses who practice business model innovation generally outperform those businesses that don't. A second factor in favor of innovating the business model is that it generally allows you to disrupt the market, to change the rules of the game so that the way you play it is the natural advantage in that market. And the third reason that we would argue why business model innovation is powerful is that it does represent the highest form of innovation. More about that later. So, what is a business model? Well, a business model is essentially a set of interconnected activities and processes that are designed ultimately to develop a proposition to customers. Now, I think one of the primary considerations we need to have when innovating a business model is to recognize that we have to actually rise above the concept of this business strategy in order to do a decent job at innovating the business model. And so we examine the concept of the innovation hierarchy. The innovation hierarchy suggests that a useful but perhaps least effective way of innovation is to focus on the operations or the process in the organization. They'll certainly give you improvements in the way you do business. The next level up might be thought of as product or service innovation, where you actually change aspects and features of the product or the service you deliver. Third up is, of course, the innovation of the strategy, which is really where business model innovation resides. But I think the point we're trying to make here is that you actually need to rise above that and you need to really rethink the organization if you are to do an effective job of innovating your business model. Because at the end of the day, what you're really trying to do is to disrupt the market, change the rules of the game. Now, business model innovation effectively recognizes that there are four key spaces that we need to focus on. There's the overall purpose, the overarching purpose, which tells you why you're in business. But the business model really consists of the arenas, the capabilities, the relationships in the business, and its financials. And as the graphic suggests, there's an overall sequence. Guided by the purpose of the organization, we really need to begin with arenas first. Arenas discusses how and where we are going to compete. Capabilities describes the way we configure our resources and processes and capabilities to support that. Our relationships are really all the partnerships we forge both inside and outside the organization. And of course, the financials really talk about the revenues and the cost structures. We want to focus on the 7 key principles or the 7 key steps that might guide you to business model innovation. Step number 1 is to segment the market around the problems that need to be solved in that market. That really requires you taking a slightly different look at the market in which you're operating, as this rather different slice of the apple suggests. And we'll return to that point very, very shortly. But it is a different way of looking at your market. And then once you've done that, secondly, to define your business around these markets. Because this is such an important concept, we've provided you with an example that might illustrate this point a little more clearly. Let's imagine that we're dealing here with a transport business that has a market which is made up of 3 key segments. And for the moment, let's imagine that the business has used a classical form of demographic segmentation to define its markets. So it says, well, we have a New South Wales market, a Victorian market, and a Queensland market. It might easily have said we have large business, small business, and perhaps government as our 3 segments. But Demography essentially tells you who they are, and these are usually easy to understand and to access criteria for segmentation, which is why they are normally used. Now, of course, the obvious outcome of this is that you end up with a business unit structure of some form, each business unit of which then serves a particular demographic segment. So in this case, we've got business unit A serving New South Wales, business unit B serving Victoria, and so on. But let's examine what might happen if we change the basis of that segmentation to addressing the problem that needs to be solved in that market. So we call this a psychographic approach to segmentation. In this instance, what we've identified is that the market actually has three different categories of problems that need to be solved. Those customers who have a need for real speed, who have a very small window of opportunity with which to transport their particular product or good. Those parts of the market who have a need for a very reliable and low cost approach. And those parts of the market who are looking for rather specialized and innovative approaches to solving fairly unique transportation and warehousing requirements. And of course, what this gives rise to then is quite a different looking organization, one which has a focus on express freight, another which has a focus on general freight, and a third which has a focus on logistics and somewhat specialized projects. So if we just follow this approach through and go to principle number 3, we see that this is all about building a value proposition or a set of value propositions that is designed to solve each of these problems. Returning again to our example, we see now that the market that has a need for speed really has a value proposition which is all around, we'll do whatever it takes. This is a proposition which is about speed and fast response, whereas the reliable market has a value proposition which is largely systems driven and designed to produce very efficient, reliable, and low cost solutions, quite different from a fast response solution. And the third segment of the market, which has a need for specialty requirements, really has a proposition which is all about finding smart, innovative approaches to somewhat unique problems and solutions that have to be found in the marketplace. So that's our third proposition or principle, if you like, around innovating your business model. The fourth one is that once you've identified these three, or in this case, three value propositions and the customer segments, you need to create very strong ownership inside the business for these propositions. So in the same way as you might have ownership of your dogs or your pets, and these are my three dogs in this picture, you need to really have somebody who wakes up every morning and all they think of is this value proposition and this customer segment. The expertise that they build up in the business is really to champion that customer segment and to develop thinking around those value propositions. In general, we find in organizations that there's very strong ownership for product or service and a particular process, but very often no one owns a particular value proposition and a particular customer segment. So principle number 4 then is to really create this strong ownership. Once we've done that, we're then of course in a position to really configure our capabilities to support those value propositions. So our processes inside the organization should be designed to promote very strong delivery of those three value propositions. Importantly as well, those capabilities now become the dependent variables. They become dependent upon the value proposition that is developed in support or to address a particular customer segment. Step number 6 then is to recognize that we need a set of capabilities in the organization, some of which will be real and some of which will be virtual. And that's really all about the manner in which we develop our relationships in the organization. So this is about recognizing that some of the things we need to retain in-house and some of them we perhaps need to outsource. But the key thing here is, again, to build capabilities around the value propositions. And finally, step number 7 then is to structure your pricing and your costs in accordance with his overall set of capabilities. I trust that this has been a useful but very quick look at how to innovate your business model. If you want further information, please contact Norman Shawn or Jeff MacDonald at normanshawn.com or bookwrapper.com. Thank you very much for listening.